Glenn Miller. In 1939, Moonlight Serenade, a composition by Glenn Miller, was recorded and quickly became big phenomena in the world of popular jazz. The song has come a very long way since then by inspiring other artists, maintaining a timeless aesthetic, and still lives up to the great reputation that it achieved when Glenn Miller first set his foot into the media and public world of music. Though Moonlight Serenade has some very noteworthy analytical components that can be dissected and discussed, there is a super peculiar historical content that's also very responsible for the piece's fame and signature style, and most all lovers of romantic jazz music will recognize now, 77 years later. Glenn Miller is without a doubt one of the most influential American big band composers of the 20th century. His contributions to jazz music in terms of creative arrangement, melodic structure, and thematic movements through different orchestral pieces are all styles and sounds that we still recognize today and can hear a ton of similarities stretch across new music. This piece in particular has some very interesting movements and melodic functions that draw our ear to a certain time in history. However, there are many reports of Glenn Miller playing this tune for fans years earlier than it was officially recorded and actually released. Most of Glenn Miller's music was either written for or performed for the American troops, and Moonlight Serenade certainly wasn't an exception. Devoted political concern was certainly a very influential factor when it came to Glenn's music, and even if the underlying intentions are not always obvious, especially in his instrumental tracks, this style of music is always going to be associated with the World War II era, just because culturally that's what's going on there at the time. Glenn Miller also relocated from California to New York City to pursue his musical career, and along the way interacted with a lot of soldiers, and just the patriotic spirit that's going on in New York at the time and the way that America is set up and the aesthetics of like current political function. There's just so much collaboration going on, and it's a huge just driving force patriotically and in a community setting for the art that's becoming popular at the time. So because of this, tons of collaborations. And Glenn Miller's search for different musical partnership and to meet up with people who could play these pieces he was writing was definitely a product of this tune. With some vague ideas in mind, but no real grip on actualizing the sounds that Glenn Miller had in mind, he sought out Joseph Schillinger, a well-educated Russian music theorist and composition instructor, to help him kind of develop what Miller at the time wanted to be his signature sound. So he had these ideas and these things that he wanted to manifest in a musical way, but he didn't really have the resources to make them happen, and so he's kind of seeking out instruction at this time. He meets Schillinger, and that's a huge credit to him on Miller's behalf. Moonlight Serenade was recorded professionally for RIC Bluebird, a record company that Miller was involved with, in 1939. Originally written and performed without any lyrics, a lot of covers and different lyrical renditions have later been composed and performed and recorded by all kinds of other artists. Frank Sinatra has a great piece of Moonlight Serenade. Al Bodley did a great rendition of Moonlight Serenade. So many. Throughout Moonlight Serenade, there is no actual key change. The piece stays in key from F major, basically from beginning to end. There is, however, one super interesting chord change in measure 30. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. During the bridge, it feels like a key change, and for this brief moment, is pulled back to what must be F major. And the reason that this excerpt and a few others of the piece make the listener hear some kind of key change, I think, is because the jazz chords used in the serenade are always either ascending or descending to create just a ton of tension. And so the resolution is always super, super satisfying, because we'll climb from, say, tonic, say we'll be at F major, and then I believe it's a sharp 5, and this chord will just increase until we get to the 2, and then the 5, and then it will resolve back to F in a higher octave, and then kind of do a similar descending motion. So it's this 2-5-1 cadence, but it's just this awesome resolution. And you know what? Let's listen to it. Let's check it out. So like I said, you can hear that 2-5-1 cadence. It's really consistent throughout the piece. One thing that's interesting you might have heard is that it's a very long it's clear, but it's a very long cadence. It takes quite a while for an actual successful cycle, a resolution, if you will. And it's nice because this creates this very relaxed feeling to the total movement of the song, and it gives the impression to the listener that there isn't a ton of need to catch up to like what's happening. And I think that's why in popular jazz music, especially just in the community and for people who aren't maybe savvy with the theory behind jazz and can't analyze it and know what's going on, it's part of the reason that it's so enchanting. And if you talk to people, it's just such a nice, slow, very, very enchanting tune. To add tension to the resolutions, Glenn Miller has set up the chords so that when one is transitioning to another, a lot of ascending, descending motion is exaggerated in the upper voices. This pulls the ear towards the next chord a little more gracefully than the abrupt chord changes that we typically hear in today's popular music. Here's an excerpt taken from Moonlight Serenade to show this theme. Notice the 2-5-1 transition. Notice the 2-5-1 transition happening by the guide of the slow half-step increase in the melody. The last component of each phrase is a grand descend from the high 1 chord down through a series of elegant different cadences until we resolve to a 1 chord once more. This part is essentially one very large 2-5-1 chord change that we've seen throughout basically the continuum of oh my god. The last component of each phrase is a grand descent from the high 1 chord down through a series of elegant different cadences until we resolve to a 1 chord once again. This is essentially one super large 2-5-1 chord change, but in this case the resolution is happening downward, so a few different alterations in connected chord tones are actually made. Notice the repeating interval of a sharp 5 that begins with an F sharp up to a D and is lowered down by a half step each time until the D reaches the major third of actual tonic of F, which is an A, and thus is reunited with the 1 chord once again. This has been an excellent, memorable, loving jazz tune for years in the past and hopefully for years to come. Let's go ahead and give it a good listen from front to back now.